Epidural. Why I opted for an epidural after 4 natural births. That would be a good question, right? Why did I decide to go for an epidural after I'd had 4 natural births? And I decided this in advance, months ahead. It wasn't something that I just all of a sudden at the hospital in the middle of labor decided I needed an epidural. It was months in advance. I planned for this. Why would I do that, and why did I do that? Here's the story. Hey, I'm Lisa. Welcome to Miracle Maker Mom. We empower moms and dads with awesome parenting tools. So if you're new here, make sure to subscribe because I know you're gonna love it here. So the question is, why did I decide to have an epidural after 4 natural births? I'm sure you've heard the story. I started out going, I'm going to do this totally naturally. This is going to be natural. I'm going to start with having natural births, only natural births. And I went into my first labor and I labored for 15 hours and I was stuck at 5 centimeters for like 10 hours and I totally lost it. And I just broke down crying and begging for an epidural. Then for the next birth, I said, I am going to do this naturally. I am going to do this naturally. I'm going to do this naturally. And I managed to have my second, third, 4th and 5th labors all naturally. Yes, I have 8 kids. So the question is, why did I all of a sudden for my 6th child, change my mind and want to go with an epidural? Usually at that point, you're like, you had so many kids already. You've done all these naturally. Why not just stick with the natural route? So I'll tell you the truth is that my second labor was amazing. I mean, it was, obviously it was still labor, but it lasted only 10 hours. The pushing the baby being born was a big surprise that was the most painful part because I thought contractions were the biggest part, were the hardest part. My third labor was also about 10 hours. Maybe my second one was 13 hours. Yeah. My 4th labor was sort of stretched out over a week, but it was on and off. And then it was only a few hours and it was actually fun. It was funny. It was a great labor. Contractions were like really far apart, like 5 minutes apart all the way till the end. When I got to my 5th labor, I had a traumatic experience. I mean, traumatic experience. I mean, it was difficult and I was traumatized. And I was like, the contractions were so close together. There was like no breathing time in between contractions. And at some point I was alone in the room because my labor had stopped or it hadn't started yet. And my husband had left to go home and check on the kids. And all of a sudden it came like crazy. And then the nurse wasn't available. And my midwife was delivering someone in the next room. And I literally was giving birth basically alone in this room. And the contractions were crazy. And I was in so much pain. And I didn't even know what to do because I was alone. Eventually, they did show up when I was like, literally the baby was half born. And I was, let's just say, traumatized from this birth. I think the most traumatizing part wasn't even the fact that I was alone. It was the fact that the contractions were so strong and they were so close together. There was like no breathing time in between. I literally came out of that birth traumatized. And I originally, if you know my story, but I really wanted to have a big family. And I was, if you want to have a big family, like let's say 8 or 10 kids, you need to, you can't wait like 5 years in between kids, obviously, like there's only a certain number of years you can have children. So I was having kids like a year and a half apart, 2 years apart, some were 2.5 years apart, but at that point they had not been more than like 2 years and like 2 months apart or something like that. So at that point, I was so traumatized from this birth that I was like, maybe we should rethink this having big family. I think we have enough kids. We're good. We're done. And I went on like that for a long time that I just was so traumatized from the birth that I'm just not, we don't need any more kids. And at some point, this was sort of, I can't begin to tell you that it wasn't like a conscious thought that I was consciously thinking and explaining to my husband. It was just like something deep down that was holding me back from wanting to like have the next kid. And it went on for a long time, like over 2 years. And at some point I was like, okay, I finally realized what was going on inside of me. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I don't want to have more kids because I'm scared of the labor and the delivery. Why don't we rethink this epidural thing? I mean, we did do it one time. I survived. It wasn't so bad. In fact, if I think back, I actually thought it was quite miraculous, that epidural. And why don't I just redo this whole thing? Okay, so this is where the funny story comes in, okay? I asked my friend who had originally given me this important decision of going naturally. And I said to her, she was having her first baby the year that I was getting married. And then like a little more than a year later, I was having my first baby, and she was already, I think her baby was like a year old or something. So when I was, busy getting married and everything, she was busy filling my head with the importance of having natural labors. It was like a very interesting conversation. I would talk about my wedding plans and she would talk about her birth plans, and it went back and forth like this for a few months. So when then she had the baby and I was already getting married, and we never even talked about the aftermath. And then we sort of forgot about that whole period, like I was busy off on whatever honeymoon, and she was busy with her newborn. And yes, she had come to my wedding, but very briefly, because she just had a baby. So anyway, all these years later, I went and had this whole conversation with her, and I was like, could you remind me again why I do natural births? And she looked at me like I was crazy. And she's like, what? Like, you're the one who started me on these natural births, remember? She's like, me? I always have epidurals all the time. And I was like, what? What? Say that again. And she was like, where did you get this? And I was like, don't you remember when I was getting married and you were having your baby, you lectured me every day on the importance of having a natural birth? And then she started laughing, and she was like, you're so funny, Lisa. That was before I had the baby. Did we ever have a conversation after the labor? And I was like, well, no, because that was the day before my wedding, or a couple days before my wedding, and we didn't connect. And she was like, you're crazy. I had such a traumatic experience, and I never wanted to have kids again. So I totally have had an epidural ever since, every time. I love epidurals. I just go in, I get my epidural, life is fine, happy, dandy, everything's good, no problems. I was like, I don't believe this. This is crazy. This is absolutely insane. There are other people in the world who really take epidurals, and it's normal and it's okay, and they have their babies and they go home happy. So after that, I was like, that's it. I'm having the next baby and I'm having an epidural. So I went into the pregnancy. I went into the idea of having another baby with the end in mind that I'm going to have an epidural. So when I walked in labor for my sixth child, I literally went in dancing, telling them can I have it yet? So, can I have it yet? Can I have it yet? They were laughing at me. When the anesthesiologist walked in, I was like, yoo-hoo, I can have it, yeah. They were laughing their heads off at me. So that is why I ended up going for the epidural, because, natural birth is really amazing and it's really good. And I will totally tell you to go for a natural birth. And I did it many times. But if it's going to cause you to the point where you just don't even want to have more kids, then you've just got to rethink this, that this is we're going to a little bit extreme. You got to come back to the middle, taking the middle path in life, the middle road, and doing what's normal and natural for you. You don't have to go to any extremes, and you certainly don't have to not have kids again just because you're scared of having, going to give birth. So that is the story of why I opted to have an epidural after 4 natural births. Now, of course, you haven't heard the next story. I'll tell you about that in a second. Question of the day. Are you thinking to have an epidural, and why? Are you feeling any pressure from other people to yes, have an epidural, or to no, not have an epidural? Tell me your thoughts about having an epidural. Leave it in the comments below. Believe you can be an awesome parent, because whatever you believe, you become. I know you love this video because you're still here, so give it a thumbs up, smash the subscribe button, and now the question is, do you want to hear the end of the story? Do you want to hear why in the end I ended up having a natural birth for number 8? So you got to find out what happened in labor number 7. So head right on up over here to find out the next part of the story.